All right, so we're diving into Kuan Yew's From Third World to First,
Yeah,
and this looks to be quite the journey.
it certainly is.
But, to set the stage for people,
Sure.
we're talking about 1965.
Right.
This tiny island nation, fresh out of, well, a messy breakup, really.
Yeah, you could say that again.
And not just that, I mean, they're surrounded by
Mm.
bigger neighbors, not necessarily friendly ones.
Yeah, not the most friendly at that point.
And they're dealing with all these internal divisions, too.
They are.
Talk about a challenge.
It's true. I mean, this is a situation most leaders would run from.
Really?
Newly independent, lacking in just about every resource you can think of.
Right.
And to top it all off, most of the world is saying Singapore, they won't make it.
Wow. So they're starting with absolutely nothing.
Pretty much, yeah.
And everyone's betting against them.
It was a tough time.
I actually read somewhere that some people even compared Singapore's future to the fall of the Roman Empire.
Oh, yeah. Those predictions were pretty dire.
So what does Kuan Yew do? I mean, this is the guy who turns it all around, turns
Right.
Singapore into this economic powerhouse.
Yeah, it's remarkable.
So how do you do it? Where do you even start?
Well, Lee Kuan Yew, or LKY as he's often called, was a fascinating guy.
Okay.
A real blend of pragmatism, but also this steely determination.
Right.
He knew how serious things were,
Yeah.
the very real threats to Singapore's existence.
So what did he do? Did he start making deals?
Yeah.
Building up the military?
Well, he did both eventually, but one of the first things he did,
Yeah.
he actually kept the British military on standby.
Wait, really? I never knew that.
Yeah, in those early days, just in case those racial tensions boiled over.
Wow, he wasn't taking any chances.
Not a single one.
But it wasn't just about defense, was it?
No, it wasn't.
He had to build a nation from scratch.
Precisely, and that meant creating a sense of unity,
Okay.
a national identity, something that could bring all these different people together.
And that's where someone like Go Keng Swee comes in.
Exactly.
I mean, that story just blew me away.
A good one.
LKY basically tells this brilliant economist, hey, we need an army. You're in charge.
That's LKY in a nutshell right there.
Yeah.
Identify the best person for the job background, be damned, and trust them to deliver.
But this is an army we're talking about.
I know, right? And Go Keng Swee had practically zero military experience.
You kidding?
Nope. But he was a strategic genius, and that's what mattered to LKY.
So they built this army overnight.
Pretty much, and it sent a clear message, too. Singapore might be small, but they weren't backing down from anyone.
What a way to start a country.
No kidding.
Okay, so they're managing things internally, but they're still a tiny country in a pretty tough neighborhood.
Right. It's like walking a tightrope.
Totally. And every step could be your last.
And LKY knew that he couldn't win any fights quickly.
Right.
So he had to play the long game.
Okay.
Had to make sure they were secure strategically.
So how did you do that?
Alliances, figuring out when to push your advantage, when to hold back a little.
And that's what makes that whole Malaysia-Singapore Airline split so interesting.
Yeah, tell me about it.
I mean, it's more than just a business decision, right?
Oh, for sure. It's totally a reflection of all the crazy politics going on in the region.
Yeah. And LKY really paints it as this struggle for control.
Well, it was.
I mean, who gets to control the airlines?
Exactly.
It's almost like this microcosm of the bigger tensions between Singapore and Malaysia.
It really is. You've got to remember, this isn't just about the planes themselves.
Right.
It's about who controls the air routes, who has more power over things like trade and tourism.
Yeah. And Singapore had to find its own way to thrive.
They couldn't be dependent on Malaysia forever.
And you can see that same kind of thinking in how he dealt with the whole water situation.
Oh, yeah, that was a major issue.
I mean, can you imagine being completely reliant on another country for your water supply?
Talk about stressful, right?
You kidding?
Yeah.
It's like this constant vulnerability.
It was a huge concern for LKY.
And he couldn't just hope for the best, I imagine.
Not when your survival's on the line.
Yeah, especially when that other country, hasn't always been the most reliable.
To put it mildly, right. But this is where LKY is really clever.
Okay, how so?
Well, he actually used that vulnerability to his advantage.
Really? How'd he do that?
He knew that if Malaysia ever cut off their water supply, it'd be a disaster for both countries.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So he used that fear to negotiate, to get concessions to make sure that water kept flowing.
Wow, so he made their weakness his strength.
In a way, yeah. And it worked, and that's probably why he was so focused on attracting foreign investment.
Instead of relying on aid.
Exactly, because aid, it always comes with strings attached.
Investment.
It's mutually beneficial, everyone wins.
Okay.
But to get those investments, he had to prove that Singapore was serious.
And that's where you get that amazing story about Seiko.
Oh, yeah, that one's a classic.
I mean, he spent years trying to convince them to open a factory in Singapore.
He was relentless.
But why Seiko? I mean, what was so special about them?
They were a leader in their field, and LKY knew that attracting a company like Seiko would show the world that Singapore was open for business.
But it wasn't easy, was it?
Not at all. Seiko wasn't convinced that Singapore had what they needed.
So what did he do?
LKY personally assured them that Singapore was committed to providing a skilled workforce and building the infrastructure they needed.
Wow, talk about a leap of faith.
It was, but that's what made LKY such an effective leader. He was willing to do whatever it took to secure Singapore's future.
So we've talked about the external pressures, this strategic maneuvering.
Right.
But now we got to talk about the social engineering.
Yeah, the really interesting stuff.
Because this is where LKY really shapes Singaporean society.
It's true. And it's the aspect of his legacy that I think people still grapple with today.
For sure. I mean, some of those policies were,
Yeah, pretty strong-handed.
to put it mildly.
Yeah.
But he always argued that it was necessary.
Oh, absolutely. He was looking at the long game.
Right, like Singapore is this young, vulnerable nation.
Exactly. They had to do whatever it took to survive and thrive.
And that's where those Confucian values come into play.
Huge influence on his thinking.
So it wasn't just him imposing his personal beliefs.
No. This was calculated. It was strategic.
So how did that play out in his policies?
We'll take the emphasis on family, for example.
Okay.
Education, strong work ethic. These were all things that LKY saw as absolutely essential for a strong society.
Yeah, and you can see that in things like the graduate mothers policy.
Oh, yeah, that one's a classic example.
I mean, giving priority in housing to educated mothers.
It's pretty out there, right?
Talk about a bold move.
But again, you see the pragmatism.
Right, he's trying to incentivize certain behaviors.
Exactly. He wanted to encourage upward mobility, break those cycles of poverty.
But it wasn't always smooth sailing, was it?
Not always. The graduate mother's policy actually backfired a bit.
Really? How so?
Well, even the people it was supposed to help weren't thrilled about it.
What do you mean?
They felt like they were being singled out,
Oh, that makes sense.
like they were being used to push a certain agenda.
And then there's the whole issue of racial tensions.
Ah, yes, another powder keg.
After that messy separation from Malaysia, I mean, how did they keep things from boiling over?
Well, LKY was really walking a tightrope. On the one hand, he's promoting multiculturalism, trying to build this national identity.
Right.
But on the other hand, he's not afraid to take some pretty drastic measures to prevent unrest.
Like what? Give me an example.
Look at what he did in Geylang Serai.
The Malay settlement.
Exactly. It had become this flashpoint for violence.
So what did he do?
Used urban planning to essentially dismantle the whole thing.
Oh, really? How'd that work?
He dispersed the population,
Okay.
used things like road planning and infrastructure to integrate them into more mixed communities.
It's fascinating how he used these very practical tools to address these deep-seated social issues.
It was all about maintaining stability for him.
And nothing says stability like a corruption-free government.
And that was non-negotiable for LKY.
I mean, he went after anyone, even people within his own party.
Oh, absolutely. Remember Fei Corp?
Oh, yeah, the high-ranking official.
Accused of corruption.
Right. And there was all this pressure to protect him.
Huge scandal.
But LKY didn't budge.
Nope. Full investigation, prosecution, the whole 9 yards.
It's amazing he was so willing to ruffle feathers, even when it meant going against his own people.
He knew that even a whiff of corruption could undermine everything they'd built.
So I guess that's the big question, isn't it?
What's that?
Can you achieve this kind of progress, this kind of transformation, without a strong hand at the helm?
It's the LKY paradox.
Right, because he was incredibly effective, but at what cost?
It's something we're all still grappling with, I think, and it's something for our listeners to consider, too.
Yeah, because there are no easy answers. But one thing's for sure. Kuan Yew left his mark on the world.
No doubt about it.
And whether you agree with his methods or not, you got to admire his commitment to building a better future for Singapore.
Absolutely. A true giant of the 20th century.
And that's our deep dive into Kuan Yew's From Third World to First.
It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for joining us.